Something happened yesterday that, it's getting harder and harder to be shocked by what the Biden administration does. So much of it is unprecedented. But something did shock me yesterday where the Department of Justice, so-called, which is a grotesque, really, parody of a Department of Justice, indicted 2 foreigners and named in the indictment 3 conservative podcasters, internet figures, all Trump supporters, as somehow connected to a foreign country. And immediately their content started disappearing from, say, YouTube. They pulled a big documentary off YouTube this morning because the Biden administration said that, it's beyond belief. So basically you have the Biden administration's Department of Justice shutting down criticism of the Biden administration. And I don't know if I'm going insane or I'm missing something. Is anyone noticing this? How is this allowed?
So I'm glad you brought this up. There's definitely something really weird going on here. So I don't have any facts any different than what other people have read about this in the last 24 hours, but I do have a gut instinct about it that's pretty strong. And it comes from just basic pattern recognition of the last 2 election cycles, okay? But my background as an entrepreneur, I have not been paying super close attention to American politics till about 2016, and then much more in 2020, and then of course I'm in the thick of it now. But let me take those last 2 presidential elections. So this myth of, does it exist, some sort of foreign election attempts at interference? Of course it does. It happens worldwide. It happens here in the United States. But this idea of Russian election interference in particular, let's trace the history of that in each of the last 2 elections. Let's go to 2016. The allegation of Russian election interference to support Donald Trump, when you double click on that and look at what was the actual foreign election interference there, it was actually U.S. election interference in the U.S. election through the Steele dossier, but laundered through the narrative of actual Russian interference. And actually there was a Russian intermediary to perpetuate that attempt at election interference about Trump's Russia collusion hoax. That's in 2016. Now we get to 2020. Again, domestic election interference is the systematic suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story. That didn't happen by Russian companies, it didn't happen by the Russian government. It happened by U.S. social media companies acting at the direction of deep state actors in the U.S. government that suppressed probably a story whose suppression changed the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. But again, what did they say? They said, no, this was Russian disinformation. So now you're seeing a pattern. In 2016, there's domestic attempts at election interference, but they run it through a Russian smokescreen. In 2020, there's domestic election interference, but they run it through a Russian smokescreen. So this time around, when I see Merrick Garland in the Department of Justice sitting under the Biden administration, suddenly alleging election interference by the Russians, I don't have any facts other than to say my radar goes off and says, I want to know where that election interference is actually beginning. A lot of those allegations that they were somehow helping Trump, I actually got curious. Actually, you could make strong arguments that a lot of these posts or whatever actually weren't helping Trump at all. But the fact that they called that Russian election interference again just suggests to me that this may be part of a pattern of what we saw in 2016 and 2020.
Well, you think?
So I don't really buy what they're selling on this.
Yeah, Kamala's losing, which she is. She is. She's losing in the states that matter. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona. It's amazing. So all of a sudden, the other side is being funded by Russia. Of all the countries that interfere in our elections, and there are many, Russia's at the bottom of the list, okay, in terms of effectiveness. But it's they're literally going back to the Russia well again?
Yeah, I think
this is not a super clever group, right?
I think that, I think the problem is they are actually a super clever group. I think that this is just the beginning of a volley. So this one's not gonna land. I think the public, fool me once, fool me twice, shame on me, fool me thrice, shame on you, whatever the expression is. The reality is I think there's going to be some weird things that happen in the next 2 months. I think there are going to be some, depending on what happens in the debate. So I'm going to the debate next week in Philadelphia. It's going to be Tuesday. I think it's going to be probably a Donald Trump demolition destruction of the other side. But don't cheer too much, right? Because I was at the last one, and that's actually in some ways was a trap. It was obviously a trap. right? They scheduled the earliest ever presidential debate in U.S. history. Why did they do that? It was obvious. It was that they wanted to test Biden as a final trial balloon, and they got a free option, because if he did great, they turned the race upside down. But if Biden did as poorly as he did, they swapped him out. It was something unthinkable that became the obvious. So I think if we have another debate smackdown on Tuesday, if I was a betting man, I'd predict that's what we're about to have. I also would predict we're going to have some very strange things that happen on the back of that as well. And I think that in some ways the Republican Party has just been so behind on this. I'll probably make some people mad by, lifting the curtain on this, but last year, to make the Republican Party debate stage, the final condition is we had to sign, all the candidates, Ronna McDaniel's requirement. I had some words to say that it had a certain outcome there, but she made us sign a Beat Biden pledge. And so this is in July or August of last year. And I said, this is dumb. This is silly, because we're not going to be running against Joe Biden. So we're going to spend an entire year of financial, political, and messaging capital running against a candidate who is not the actual candidate we're going to run against. But it was the Beat Biden pledge. That was just the dogmatic messaging of the Republican Party. And what do you know? A year and a half later, we've wasted a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of credibility with the public. We even boosted the media's credibility because they got that last month, where they got to criticize Joe Biden. So now when they're not actually going after Kamala, they still look even-handed to the American public because they went after a Democrat most recently. In some ways, it was the worst of all worlds. And so I think we need to get better as a movement, I think as a Republican Party, on staying skeptical, on skating to where the puck is going. And I think ultimately the way we're going to win this is actually not even by focusing on Kamala. That's sort of where I've landed on this is, people say she's a communist or she's, a socialist or whatever. I think that is giving her a little too much credit because it assumes she has an ideology.
I agree.
She doesn't have an ideology. Right. She just doesn't. Most people in California here who know her, she's just another cog. Right? She's another cog in a machine. We're not running against a candidate. We are running against a system. And the way we're going to win this is forget who they put up. Kamala, if they make her the president before the election, who knows, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If we actually win this by offering our own vision of who we are and what we actually stand for, right? Individual, family, nation, and God, beat race, gender, sexuality, and climate. If we have the courage to stand for it, but that's how we protect ourselves against what I think is going to be a complicated couple of months ahead is what I predict.
So smart.